Daphne. I'm a research and programming assistant here at ISGAP. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce, and I hope I don't butcher your name, Dr. Christoph Gassenschmidt, historian with a focus on modern and East European history. He has a PhD in modern European history from Oxford University, and he's a professor at the American College in Greece, where he teaches courses on several subjects, including American, German, and Russian history. Today, Dr. Gassenschmidt will be presenting Swimming Against the Tide, Ordinary German People Who Stood Up and Saved Jewish and Non-Jewish Lives Before and During the Holocaust. So, Professor, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much for the kind words, so I can start. It's a topic that I got to by, how can I say, by me being a German living abroad. I've never really, let's say, liked to engage in this, let's say, in German history, but I could just not escape my heritage. And people kept on asking, I'm living since 25 years in Greece, and people kept on asking questions about the Nazis and all these things, so I just couldn't escape. But before I keep going on, I start. I have quite a few PowerPoints here, and you will see saving Jewish people or non-Jewish people is part of what we call the rescue or the rescue resistance. It's a new term that was created by some German historians in the 1980s. Now, what most people know about this period of time, German resistance in general, because you will see hiding Jewish people and saving them from the Nazis was illegal and therefore persecuted. Therefore, these people belong to the resistance. That's why I'm linking it to it. And now here, these are a couple of movies that most likely all of you or most of you will know. One is Valkyrie with Tom Cruise. Here's actually a scene from the movie, and here you see the real image of Stauffenberg, the man he portrays basically. He looks actually quite familiar, quite similar to the actual person, and was a great movie, etc. But I heard from interviews from the United States that people were not even aware of German resistance at all until 2008. Yeah. Then the next movie that I have in the list is Schindler's List, very famous movie about Oskar Schindler, who was played by Liam Neeson in the movie from '93. And here's the real Oskar Schindler. Let's say there's a lot of controversy about the film back and forth, but at least people got to know that there were actually German people that engaged in this. And why, you will see why in a bit. And then the third, here is Plaszow concentration camp where he was, Oskar Schindler, and the commander, Amon Göd. The third movie is Sophie Scholl, The Last Days, the most recent, so to speak, of the ones that are really known about German resistance. In the meantime, there were many, many more movies that have been created, and I will, let's say, mention some of them later on. This is actually the movie, Sophie Scholl. These were young German students belonging to the University of Munich that organized a resistance group called the White Rose. And now in Germany, how was the whole, let's say, topic of resistance being, let's say, tackled? Now we have two stories, basically, one from West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, and the German Democratic Republic, the Communist East, so to speak. And the stories are quite different. So until the 1970s, the topic was not really tackled almost at all. Yeah, and if it was let's say, tackled. It was tackled in, let's say, the context of Stauffenberg, but rather being a traitor than a hero. Yeah, it's a very controversial figure, even in, let's say, in the eyes of some German people. Now here you see the divided Germany, just to give you, let's say, the idea how it looked like. Obviously, most of you know that. So from the 70s on, we have now all of a sudden, let's say, a lot of emphasis on all sorts of resistance movements. You may be aware of the Edelweiss Pirates or the Swing Kids. Books on this appeared mainly in German, not in English. In English, the material is still very basic. This is my experience. You won't find many books in English on that topic. Then also Stauffenberg had a few books that were published about him. Resistance groups, White Rose had also a lot of, let's say, especially German or German-speaking, let's say, historians. And here, just to give you some information, these people, they concentrated on distributing leaflets, calling upon the German people to start thinking about the Nazis. Here you see one of the original leaflets. You can find all of them and next to it in Google, you can Google them, and you find also an English translation to them. So don't be scared, you know, you don't have to deal with the German. You can also find the English translation, it's easy. Now the question is, who qualifies now as, let's say, a resistance person? Because I was always under the impression before I got really involved in this topic, that it's mainly people that try to kill Hitler, yeah, or someone that tries to take over and getting rid of the Nazis. And important here, you must understand, you must take into account that by mid-1933, 3 months into the Nazi rule, Germany was brought into line. Basically, there was no political party other than the Nazis. The SPD moved abroad, was called Sopade. Trade unions were neutralized, basically. Newspapers were completely taken out. And the whole hierarchy was organized like a pyramid style from a control that was ensured by the so-called Blockwart. It was a person responsible for an area, a local area, all the way up to the Gauleiter. So it's very, very difficult to move in other ways than the official Nazi, let's say, ways. Okay, so the definition of resistance, as I see it, is basically anything that violates the laws under the Nazis. Yeah, so because that makes you illegal and that makes you part of the resistance. So not joining the Hitler Youth, telling jokes about the Nazis, hiding, protecting Jewish people. That's where these people come in that I'm talking about today as well, or helping other people. The problem, generally speaking, about this topic is that most of these activities were done secretly. So obviously you cannot just, let's say, produce documents, because you would, let's say, basically create material against you that could be used against you in a court case. So obviously you have to move very secretly in clandestine ways. So it's very hard to find, let's say, reliable information. It's not easy, but you need to dig. So here are various forms of resistance. Even listening to the BBC was considered really bad, especially towards the end of the war. Writing V for victory signs on buildings, listening to Nickerkite music, as the Nazis called it, or defying Nazi ideology during a sport event. This is something that I found out quite, recently. Here's a case. Lutz Long was the silver medal winner in long jump in Berlin in 1936 in the Olympic Games. Yeah. And he dared in front of more than 80,000 people, including Hitler. Hitler was there, where he not only dared to lose to an African-American, Jesse Owens, let's say disproving the, let's say, theory of the master race. No, he embraced his competitor. Even Jesse Owens apparently would not have won the gold medal if it would not have been for Lutz Long that advised him how to succeed in the end, because he only succeeded in the third jump and only on the advice of his competitor Lutz Long. Really fantastic story. And he actually just returned home. He got a phone call immediately from Rudolf Hess telling him that he should not have done that. Yeah, so he was reprimanded right away after his action. And here he was unfortunately killed in World War II, 1943 in Italy. Here you see the images. This is Lutz Long next to Jesse Owens. He's walking in the Olympic Stadium in front of Hitler, arm in arm with Jesse Owens. This is like major defiance of Nazi ideology. I mean, in front of more than 80,000 people. Then here we go. This is the, let's say, the actual thing that I'm talking about today is actually the righteous among the nations, so to speak, in a way, added with things of the German resistance, obviously. So these numbers are outdated a bit. I think there are more now. They're constantly updated in Yad Vashem. And here you see some individuals that are officially, let's say, recognized. Pastor Heinrich Grüber, for instance, let's say a Protestant priest, he had a whole network that covered, let's say, areas beyond Berlin. And the problem is, you know, to identify the various links between resistance groups, because they learned, of course, that they should not make their presence known to the rest of the world, because that would have meant being arrested by the Gestapo, etc., etc. So it would have meant prison, concentration camp, or God knows what else. So you had to move very smartly and in secret ways. And then ordinary working class people, many people remain, let's say, in the dark, because their names were not revealed for obvious reasons. People just helped along, quite often not being paid. Some people were paid for it, obviously, and made a little bit of a living. So it was not only about humanitarian, let's say, reasons. Here's another movie that you may know the story about it, that basically this was one of the biggest mass protests in Berlin in the middle of the war, and the Gestapo was actually embarrassed, and Goebbels was embarrassed to the point that this would reach a wider audience, so that he just let them go in the end. Here is some images. Here is a memorial of it, and here's a scene from the movie, and this is the cover of the DVD. Then military resistance, and here you see it's also linked to saving Jewish and non-Jewish people alike. Here we have the famous case. I've seen him mentioned, let's say, in various books, Major or Major Karl Placke, who employed a lot of, let's say, Jewish people in Vilnius, although they were not experts at all. It was quite funny. And they made use of the necessities of the war production. This actually helped, let's say, Jewish and non-Jewish people alike to survive the Holocaust, because the Nazis needed desperately working hands to continue the war. It may sound absurd, but these were the absurdities of World War II, so to speak. He also claimed that for reasons of morale or good morale, it was also mandatory or necessary to engage also the spouses of the Jewish men and even the children there. He was hiding there. Another case was Feldwebel or Sergeant Anton Schmid. He was not as lucky as Placke. He was actually eventually denounced by someone, and he lost his life over his actions. And what they did mainly was to try to organize a legal, let's say, way to live for these Jewish people with permits, with passports and all that stuff. Here you see Placke, and this is Schmid. Sorry, I have to run it a bit. Then the Secret Service, the so-called Abwehr, and I tell you why these were very, let's say, important. because the Abwehr or the Secret Service, they had access to official papers. So if you wanted to get away, you needed official papers. You could not just go around with forged documents, because that would have, let's say, maybe outed you, you'd say, and would have given you in. So you needed, it was better to actually have official documents, passports, etc., etc. Also, on the other hand, they also tried to inform the world about the existence of a German resistance, which was blissfully ignored, basically. For what reasons? Then here you can speculate. You know, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Churchill, and all the leaders that were informed about it. They also knew about Auschwitz. They were informed by the German resistance about the whole horror of the Holocaust, and they chose to completely ignore it. Anyway, so they did a trick here by tricking the Nazis, basically, and Hitler himself into this, how can I say, illusion, as if Jewish people could actually help the Nazis run the war. It was really an amazing story. So here we go. What they did was, among many other things, let's say a specific move called Unternehmen 7, K7, which saved 13 Jewish people, and here men, women, children, and they arranged it in a way to escape into Switzerland, and from Switzerland then to the United States or elsewhere, because Switzerland was the only gate out of Europe, because everything else was closed, basically. So, and this was actually proved lethal to the guys that organized all this. Like you can see here, Donani lost his life, Canaris, his position, etc., over this specific action, because one of the employees there in the ministry got suspicious and basically revealed the details, and then they were arrested and executed, many of them. Then you will see a very interesting case, Otto White, who was an entrepreneur in Berlin. He produced brushes and brooms and all that for the Wehrmacht. Also important that, let's say, they used, how can I say, the circumstance of the war, that, oh, well, it is very important to keep the war effort going. So we need to help the Wehrmacht to keep on going in the war. And therefore, let's say any employee is important, you know. So White basically played this instrument. And here you see it's still around, you know, it's like a museum nowadays, the workshop for the blind people, and this is Otto White. Now, the interesting story is that he was actually blind, or I mean, to 90-something% he was blind. Nevertheless, he traveled to Auschwitz and he actually saved one of his employees. He got Alice Licht off the hook. And also he employed Inge Deutschkron, a very famous writer. You see her here in the images, photos. And until today, she praised Otto White's engagement in all this, an amazing man. In Berlin, about 2,000 Jews survived the war. One of them was Michael Degen, a very famous actor. He became famous in West Germany as an actor. He wrote a book, Nicht alle war Mörder, not all were murderers. And they made a movie out of it. Later on, here you see the cover of the movie. It's an amazing story. It's like a 2-year odyssey in which his mother and he himself basically was hidden by a whole lot of people. I didn't count how many there were, because they had to change the apartments over and over again, because it was too dangerous to stay in one place for too long. Then another case was a Jewish family in Westphalia, and there was also a movie made out of it, and we know this from Marga Spiegel's book, Saviors in the Night. Here you see the movie. This has been translated also, or dubbed, whatever. And then here an individual case, Heinrich and Maria List, who were hiding a Jewish employee or ex-colleague, etc. This is the area where they lived, and this is a photo actually of these guys from Yad Vashem that I found. Then, during the interrogation, he said basically, he died in, as you can see here, in Dachau. It was merely that I felt sorry for him and let him stay because we knew him very well in the past and had good business relations with him. So it was pure, how can I say, human solidarity, so to speak. And this is a case that I've just come across a few days ago. Erwin Dold, and now an amazing story. He was actually a soldier in World War II, a pilot, and then he was incapacitated. He could no longer due to his injuries, and he became a concentration camp commander, believe it or not. Amazing story. And he actually saved people, believe it or not. You're going to ask, let's say, how can a concentration camp commander save people? Well, he provided them with everything they needed to survive. And he was actually put on trial after the war in a city next to my hometown, Baden-Baden, called Rastatt. And he was the only concentration camp commander ever to be acquitted based on the testimonies of former inmates. So they testified in favor of him. So here we go. Let's do it. Then Paul Grüninger, he was actually Swiss. He, alongside with his colleagues from Germany, from the other side, saved also lots of people, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. I think the estimates go towards about 3,600 people he saved within roughly a year or so. How was this possible? It was very possible because Switzerland was the only gateway out of the nightmare. Yeah, because Austria had been closed. The way out of Germany was closed anyway. So the only way that Jewish people could escape was by crossing the green border between South Germany and Switzerland. Yeah, here we go. And he also, let's say we have testimonies also about him from people that he saved. And they say basically he just did it because he felt, let's say, sorry for the people, and he was there to help, you know, like from one human being to another human being. And they also made a movie out of it that I found also recently, and I watched, called The Actor, The Case Grüninger. And this is one of my latest findings, Marcel Marceau. He was originally Marcel Mangel. He was born in Strasbourg, in Alsace. So he was, you know, that the Alsatians are ethnic Germans, basically. So I included him here too. He was, from his passport, he was French, obviously, and he saved people, especially Jewish children, in the area around Limoges. As also the movie you just saw, yeah. And this is an amazing story here with John Rabe. He saved about 200,000 Chinese people. They made a movie about this. Is a photograph of Japanese people, soldiers, sorry, killing children there in Nanking. Yeah, they killed about 300,000 people there in a week or so. And here you see him in the middle, in the photograph above. And on the right, you see the image or the cover of the DVD. Rebellious youth. I see time is running. The rebellious youth. Here you see some individual cases. Helmut Hübener. You will see later, I say it later as well. He was basically shocked by the behavior of the Nazis towards Jewish people and how they treated them. and let's say decided then to move against the Nazis. He started listening to the BBC and spread the news instantly to defy basically the German propaganda, the Nazi propaganda machine. There's a movie, the movie I've not found yet. What happened to him, he was executed. Here's the place where he was executed. And it's the movie Truth and Conviction. I've not found this movie yet, so I'm not sure. Anyway, another case is Josef Landgraf, same story, also listened to the BBC News. And these people did everything to, let's say, to work in their environment, basically, to help people also. You know, many of these people were also involved in helping Jewish people to survive or hide. Here you see some images of the resistance group Landgraf. Then Walter Klingenbeck, same story, also young, let's say, German people that once they heard about the real story, they started to act against the Nazis. And here you see some of these people are commemorated later on. And they even named a school after him. Then Bartholomäus Schenk, another, let's say, of these rebellious youth that worked in exactly the same way as all the others, I mean, that I just mentioned. And the resistance groups included the Edelweiss-Piraten. Edelweiss-Piraten actually also were hiding, let's say, deserters from the German army, from the Wehrmacht, Jewish people, etc., etc., etc. They were really widespread. You see here the youth groups were spread all over Germany. You see it here in Berlin, Duisburg, Dortmund, Bremen, Hanover. So it's not concentrated on any specific area. So then the swing kids, obviously, they listened despite all the propaganda to American swing music, or swing music in general, is international music basically. And they defied the Nazis openly. And you see this also in image here, photograph of these youth groups that were not part of the Hitler Youth. And here also a movie about it. This actually when they attacked the Gestapo headquarters in, I think it was Cologne, some of the cities in the West. This actually happened. This is based on a true story. And here some of them being executed in public. So Hubert Breitschaft is another, let's say, case. He was a school teacher that did no longer believe the doctrines and all that. He defied the Nazis openly in school and elsewhere. And obviously he was also betrayed by someone, denounced, put on trial and executed. That's a photo of his. There's actually a very heartbreaking letter that his daughter sent to Himmler personally, in which he actually asked him to please spare her father's life. Is really moving. And they executed him anyway. Then Otto and Elise Hampel, this case has been made known by Fallada, Hans Fallada, the writer, and was made into, it's also translated, Alone in Berlin is the book in English, and was also made into a movie. It's about a couple that started distributing postcards, etc., calling the people to resist against the Nazis in Berlin. Eventually, they were caught in the act, so to speak. Here's the movie on the right side, and executed, both of them. They had lost their son, their only son, and ever since, you know, they saw no reason anymore to, let's say, live just like that in Germany without resisting. Here's a joke. Yeah. And for this joke, this woman was executed, although her husband had died in Stalingrad. Didn't matter. Yeah, just for telling this joke, she was executed. Then here I come to an end. So I guess I'm almost, let's say, in the time limit that I have. The motivation to resist was quite, how can I say, manifold, the reasons. The Red Orchestras were not actually only communists. It's a very funny story because the Red Orchestra were called Red Orchestra and taken as communists because the Gestapo labeled them like this. And everybody else just copy-pasted it, basically. But there were people from all strands of the political, let's say, spectrum. The Edelweiss Piraten, because they defied, they did not want to live the official life of the Hitler Youth. And also here you see a clear case with Helmut Hübner that I described. This was not the only case that people turned to resistance because they were appalled by how people were treated in Germany. The Nazis had to be very careful how they acted in public because the German people were naive and were, God knows what you can call them, God knows what, but they have a sense of decency in a way. And you could not be acting too openly, too aggressive. Yeah. And then you have people that were from the beginning against the Nazis. And here, this is, I think, my last slide, that it continues. For Otto Weid, it was like a challenge to outwit the Nazis. It helped also because the Nazis, as you could see also in Oskar Schindler, were quite corrupt, and you could actually pay them off easy. You know, like you saw, maybe you can remember the images of Oskar Schindler handing over a briefcase of money to Amon Goeth, and he gladly took it, like many other, let's say, Nazis too. German officers whose eyes were opened basically after they'd been taken POW, prisoner of war. They joined the Bund Deutsche Offiziere in Russia. And then, of course, once the war came to a close, then even officers that had been loyal so far turned against the Nazis, as you know, the famous case of Stauffenberg here. What can be said about this is that resistance took place on a daily basis everywhere by all sorts of people. You cannot really classify them. They come from the middle class or from the workers or from God knows what. You have cases from all branches of society. And I could have, let's say, named here many, many more cases and given you many, many more cases where ordinary people just acted because out of a sense of decency, okay? And as I write here, as my last line here, it is my human duty to act. This is what many, many of these people, if they testified. Okay, I think that was, yeah, that was about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is when I welcome people to raise your hands or put questions in the chat. We'd love to unmute you so you can ask Professor questions directly. I guess I'll start off with a question of my own. You mentioned right at the beginning that people try to inform the West and they ignored the message. Do you know how? Like, was it via letter or a radio signal? Like, how did people try to inform?
No, they organized, they sent once, especially the Abwehr was allowed to travel. Yeah. So either, let's say, people from the Abwehr, like Bonhoeffer and others, traveled personally to countries like Switzerland, Sweden, to neutral countries during World War II. And there they got in touch with ambassadors of the countries in question and told them frankly what was happening. They even informed them by delivering whatever, let's say, material they could get hold of, and nothing happened. And we know now from testimonies that these news reached Churchill and this news reached Roosevelt, and they decided not to act. They gave priority to defeating the Germans militarily first, and then see the rest. And some of the actual of let's say, I think it was Roosevelt or Churchill, I'm not quite sure, could not believe these stories anyway. They thought it was like part of a certain propaganda that cannot be believed. And the other problem was that if the, let's say, the Allies would have made it their cause, it would have given, let's say, material to the Nazi propaganda that the Allies would act as a worldwide Jewish conspiracy against the poor German people. Yeah. So it's a difficult story. It's not so easy to really come to a conclusion about this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's hard, very hard situation. Again, I don't know if we have, sorry?
Yeah, because this is also full of emotions, you know, this kind of like topics are full of emotions. They, you know, people have hard feelings about this. It's very difficult to find objective judgments.
So we have a question from Ken Weiner or Weiner. So he asks, when did the Allies become aware of what was really happening in the concentration camps?
Oh, this was early on, from very early on, you know, like, as you know, I mean, Auschwitz did not come into, let's say, get into, let's say, action until 42, basically. So most people think that they were killing people in Auschwitz from the beginning. That was not the case. The actual Holocaust as such was a rather late decision until today. We don't really know where it actually originated, who actually pulled the trigger, who, like, as you know, there is no direct order by Hitler. He was too lazy to do any paperwork, so he would not possibly have given the order, etc. And so I would say from the moment the first news were heard, let's say, about the Holocaust, what was happening, it was spread because there were thousands of people involved in it. This is what most people ignore. Yeah? From nurses, from over doctors, over, let's say, I mean, you could just think about it, who else is involved in the whole thing? You get to 10,000s of people, and you cannot, let's say, hide the truth, sharing all this with so many people. Like many soldiers came back, and like Alexander Schmorell, who was one of the members of the Weiße Rose, of the White Rose, student resistance in Munich. He was in Russia. He spoke Russian. He was partly Russian. And he actually witnessed some of the atrocities committed by the Einsatzgruppen, by the special, let's say, police force that killed God knows how many people in Poland and Russia. And he witnessed a couple of these atrocities personally. And he brought them back, and they spread the news in the leaflet. In some of the leaflets, they actually mention not exactly, let's say, the specific cases, but they say basically, and they claim that the Nazis are killers, murderers, etc., etc. Yeah, so I would say from early on, when the first news came out, 42, 41, 42, the existence of the camps were known all over the place because there were thousands of camps. It could not be hidden. I mean, it was impossible. Only the extermination camps. That was, of course, news that was difficult to get to because the Nazis put all the extermination camps into the east. In Germany, there was not a single extermination camp. They were all placed in the east, you know, to hide this from the German people. Because imagine, yeah?
No, go on. I was just saying we've gotten more questions.
Sorry?
We've gotten more questions, but that was interesting. They were hiding them from the German people.
Yeah, because I mean, like how could you, let's say, explain this to the German people that you bring in, let's say, into a concentration camp, train after train after train of people. The concentration camp is not growing in size. And then you have that grotesque smoke coming out of the chimneys that smells like hell. I mean, you can count one and one together. And people in Poland outside Auschwitz, they guessed this immediately. Yeah, they understood that immediately. We have testimonies of local people from there that you may see in the movie Shoah by Claude Lanzmann. Yeah, he actually interviewed some of these people there. You see them, it's amazing. They understood very clearly what was happening with the people that were taken in trains to Auschwitz.
Yeah, it's honestly, that's horrifying. Just the smell is, yeah. But we have a question.
Sure.
They ask, why do you think that there's such little knowledge outside of Germany of the resistance efforts? And do you think it's connected with the Ally reluctance to act on it? You know, so.
Well, I mean, history is I mean, it's difficult to let's say to answer this in a satisfactory way. I would say the Germans have a complex, first of all, you know, like the topic of resistance smells a little bit of being a traitor. Yeah, so right after in the 1950s or 60s, that's why these groups were not seen as resistance that should be honored. Yeah, and also the German law, or let's say the legal system, acted against these people. I read about a case of a young German boy that lost his life, and his relatives could claim some money of compensation after the war. And the courts ruled against this because they said, why? The guy was executed based on the existing laws. So why would we pay a compensation? So there's a certain German complex to not, I mean, that we have to see ourselves as the Nazis, they're finito, you know, that's it. So talking about resistance too much makes it look like as if the Germans were to be excused for the horrors they committed, okay? Because obviously the German resistance wasn't a minority. The majority of the German people went along, like that's most of the time the case. And it's a very complex question. It's not easy to answer why, and also because the facts are difficult to get to. Where do you find real proof? You know, like many times people, let's say, do not reveal their names, or they don't want, especially after World War II, they would not come out and tell the neighbor, oh, I was hiding Jewish people. Yeah, you wouldn't do that, you know, even if it was nice and good and things, but there was a lot of, how can I say, it's difficult to talk about it. Because obviously you have a complex that when you're confronted with Auschwitz and all that you were part of it, you don't want to really admit it. You have a real problem to admit to that. I mean, you see this, Daphne, you say you come from Poland also. In Poland, they have a huge problem with this. You know, like, you know, there's a law. There are laws that can get you into trouble if you connect Polish people to the Holocaust. Yeah. So in many countries, they have a problem with this. Although I claim, and I still claim in my classes, I will teach a course on the Holocaust in next semester again in the fall. And I tell my students the Holocaust was a European venture. It was not only a German venture. The Germans started it and the others jumped in gladly. Yeah, you see this from so many stories. I mean, how could you organize this without the help of thousands of people that would help you along? Yeah, like the extermination of the community, the Jewish community in Thessaloniki, was also helped along. The Nazis didn't have to do much there. Yeah, information was given to the Nazis voluntarily. Yeah.
On a lighter note, do you think that more stories of heroism will be discovered, that more cases are going to be coming out as we move, as the generation that's more connected to the Holocaust starts to die out? Maybe the children will feel more comfortable telling their family history of saving the Jews.
Yes and no. You know, like you can find books and you can find information, but it's not easy to get to unless you really dig and you really look around. You can also find there's there is some local communities in Germany started to celebrate these people. It's not too many, but we have also this initiative of the Stolpersteine. These are the stones that they have put in Berlin and in other places. I don't recall which other German cities, where you basically, where they are put basically on places where people were killed or were taken to concentration camps to commemorate, to make people aware of these things. And so maybe the resistance, especially of younger people, etc., will come out, let's say, more, let's say, in the future. It's difficult to predict, hard to predict. But they should be mentioned because these people, many of these people lost their lives. And I asked myself when I came across this topic, why would I risk my life to save someone else? Yeah, it's really, it takes a lot of guts to do that.
Yeah. We have a question on chat. Is there like is there a percentage of the Germans that help to save Jews, or is the number more obscure? Because you said that a lot of people still hide it, but
it's still obscure. We cannot really quantify how many people got involved. But talking about my own, let's say, family and all that, just briefly, maybe. Let's say when I came across, as I said, you know, like I never really wanted to engage in history of Nazi Germany, etc., etc. But living abroad in England, in France, in Greece now for many years, you get confronted with your history. You cannot run away. And then I read all these horror stories and eventually got to read about the Holocaust. And then I got a little bit worried. You'd say, what did my ancestors actually do? My two grandfathers, you know? So I investigated. And you can, about the Second World War, you can find out details because the German Wehrmacht was organized centrally from Berlin. So there are archives. For the First World War, you cannot really find details. Let's say about, let's say, rosters of army units. In the second, you can. So my father, the father of my father, he served in Russia, in the so-called Volchov front outside Leningrad, and he was in an artillery regiment. And my other grandfather was too old. He served as a customs officer in La Rochelle in France. So thank God nothing bad happened. Also in the among my other relatives, they all served in the Wehrmacht and were, I mean, as far as I know, not involved in any of these atrocities. But then again, you never know. Yeah, my grandfathers, they did not volunteer even to talk to their spouses, to my grandmothers, about their, let's say, experiences in the war, because you would just not talk about it when you're on holidays at home. So it's difficult to quantify or to what you can say is that resistance existed almost in every German city, in one form or another. Because it's in the nature of human beings that you don't want to like just act like everybody else. Yeah, it's the majority does it, yes, but there are also people that criticize. It's that, you know, it's like nowadays in our, let's say, Corona times, where, let's say, most people go along, but some people go out and start doubting certain measures, etc., because they start thinking. Yeah, and the same was in Nazi Germany. You know, some people started thinking and doubting what was going on around them. Yeah, and this could be very basic things like, let's say, providing Jewish people, let's say, also with food, with clothes, with whatever else, you know, like just to help out. Yeah, and you can't quantify where do you start. I mean, people don't volunteer to say, oh, well, I gave this and that person, let's say, €5. You wouldn't say that. Yeah, so to quantify this is very difficult.
I think we have our last question for today's lecture. It's a bit further from the topic, but I think it's connected well. So Irv asks, what do you think about the German government advising the Jewish community there to no longer wear kippahs and to not being attacked? how do you think the situation of Jews in Germany is becoming dire again? Do you think that was good advice on the German government, or should they have not said that, considering the history? Like, the Jews should not be hiding, or how do you think that presents?
Well, difficult to say. I mean, there was this case of, I think, a young Jewish man that was making the experiment, going around in Berlin, I think, wearing a kippah to see what happens. And then he came across some rather negative, let's say, responses and all that. And the problem, how can I say, it's difficult to fight, let's say, anti-Semitism and outrages of that sort, because how will you tackle that? You know, it's difficult, because this happens on an individual case, and you can also not quantify or qualify. It's like, you know, and the German government does a lot of stupid things lately. So I don't know whether it was really wise or not. I mean, I would not give this advice out, you know, but because it has a bad smell again, once again, you know, like whatever the German government officially announces or does always has a little bit of a yeah, like in either direction. And obviously this does not help at all. I mean, like you're supposed to hide that you're Jewish. That's kind of stupid. And it certainly doesn't help.
Okay, I think those are all the questions we had. If anybody still has something else you want to say, this is your time to shine. Otherwise, I think this will be it.
You can always, let's say, forward any question that any one of you has. I gladly respond if I can.
Yeah.
But,
so,
okay.
Are you? If you'd like, people can email me, and I can connect via email if anybody has any other questions. If that works.
Yes. Please. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay, perfect. So my email is Daphne Kleiman. You can see my name on the screen at isgap.org. I'd be happy to connect you with Professor Gassenschmidt and for this lecture to continue. And honestly, this was a very, very important topic. I don't think the Germans that saved the Jews are talked about nearly enough. So thank you so much, Professor, for this lecture. It was fascinating.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
No problem. So I hope to see all of you on April 4th for our next webinar. And this will be it for today. Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you.